What you wanna know? What's going on, people? Myke C-Town here with another episode of What Do You Want to Know, where you ask your questions, and if I like your question, I will answer it on camera. I want to say thank you for all the people who have submitted more questions since my last video. I have quite a few pretty interesting topics that I'll be covering in the upcoming weeks. Since I have some holiday time, I may even do a couple of these in 1 week. I also may try to catch up on some album reviews. There's quite a few albums that I've missed over the past few months just from being busy. There's one particular album that you guys have been bugging the living shit out of me about, so I may do a late pass review on that. We shall see. I've also been getting quite a few relationship advice questions, which I find kind of funny considering I am a complete and total relationship fuck up. I find it humorous that you guys are asking me questions about how to deal with your own relationship problems. If I get enough of those, I may even actually turn that into another segment on this channel. C-Town's Relationship Corner might actually be its own thing. So let's jump right into this. First question. Sam Wilhelm said, "Hey Myke, this has been itching my brain for a while. How do you feel about speaking to people whom you generally look up to? Are you ever afraid of them looking down on you? And has the thought ever occurred to you that some of your own fans speaking to you could have the same fear that you may or may not have for your idols? For that matter, what would you say to people in general who are typically scared that their idols would look down on them if they had interaction with them?" Well, I'm generally pretty selective over who I would consider an idol or someone I look up to. You know, most of the idols I still have are the ones I had when I was a kid. I did a video on that, so you should check that out. But they're mostly musicians, artists, a couple skaters. In my time, I've met, a few people that I consider idols. For the most part, they've been pretty cool. But, I've met a few people in bands who turned out to be complete and total assholes, man. When you're young and you really like a band, you develop this insane idea of how they're supposed to be. Their music means so much to you, and they're speaking to you, and you start to think that, like, if you ever got the chance to tell them how much their music means to you, that they'd realize that you're something special. You're so much different from all the other fans. They want you to actually be a real life friend. And then when you finally meet them and they treat you like you're just one of many, you're totally crushed. So here's the problem, and this totally sounds hokey, but musicians, artists, celebrities, whatever, they're just human beings. They just happen to have a talent that you may or may not have, or like some of us just happen to have a platform that you may not be able to use. It's perfectly okay to admire people, but the problem comes when you put them on some kind of inhuman pedestal, and you have this idea of them being as otherworldly. They're really not. And if they think they are, then they're fucking assholes. Some people like to treat celebrities as if they exist simply for their enjoyment. And although I don't consider myself even remotely a celebrity, for the sake of this question, I'm going to put myself into this category, even though I feel like a total asshole doing so. As far as me being a role model, man, I've said this before. I think it's weird. It's cool that people think I'm cool, but that's kind of the line that I draw. I think there are a lot of people in the world that deserve to be role models, and I don't really consider myself one. I don't do anything special. I don't do anything that you guys can't do. I argue with 3 guys about rap shit, or I get on here and I tell you guys what you should think about topics that I think about. There's no real talent involved in that. As far as in person, I've never had a viewer of my videos meet me in person and then say I'm a dick. It's never happened, because I'm not. I start off being nice to anyone I meet. With me, you have to earn the privilege for me to be a dick to you. 9 times out of 10, if you meet me in person and you're a dick, I'd sooner just dismiss you and walk away than I would waste my time arguing with you. You know, simply because, like, if I don't know you, I have no emotional investment in you, and therefore it's really not worth me putting forth that kind of energy into a hostile situation with you. So as far as I go, if you ever see me in person and you want to come up and say, "What's up, dude? I like your videos," please do. Now, what would I say to someone who is scared to meet their idol? Fuck it, man. Just do it. Like, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen? You know, they're an asshole? You know, fine. Now you know they're an asshole. If they're nice, how great of a story would that be? You know, oh, I met so-and-so and they were the coolest guy ever. Look, just treat the people you look up to as if they're human beings, man. Approach them and address them with respect, and they should treat you the same way. And if they don't, fuck them, man. They're not worth your admiration. For this next question, I actually got asked this by multiple different people, and I'm just going to lump it all into one big answer as opposed to making separate videos, because that would be completely illogical. So yeah, I'm going to read their 4 renditions of this question, because each one's a little teeny bit different, but they can all be answered, you know, the same way. John McLovin said, what do you want to know? Reasons for going straight edge and breaking edge. Doll2695 said, hey Myke, just curious, why and when did you stop being straight edge? Love the show and what you do. Thanks for being awesome. Good morning, Captain Crunch said, hey Myke, big fan of DHH and your solo videos. I'm a high schooler who follows straight edge for multiple personal and health reasons. I plan on sticking with it for a while, definitely until I'm 21. You've mentioned before that you were also straight edge in high school, and I was wondering why you eventually decided to give it up. It's hard to remain straight edge in the adult world. Saucy Sam Love said, what do you want to know? Hey Myke, I was wondering what made you break away from straight edge culture. Is it something you think just would have happened, or do you think it has to do with moving away from the hardcore scene? Honestly, man, I'm really surprised that so many people had this question for me. But look, I went straight edge when I was in 9th or 10th grade. I think 10th grade. I did a video outlining my experiences with high school in the bully video that I did. If you haven't watched that, check it out. I talked about how hard it was for me through high school. I found punk rock. You know, that was a big deal for me because it gave me a sense of belonging. It immediately gave me a place to look when everyone else thought I was a total weirdo. You know, straight edge came from finding punk. You know, me and my friend Brad kind of got into punk and hardcore together and went straight edge at the same time. I never asked for his reasons, but my reasons were pretty easy, you know. I was already not into drinking or drugs, you know, and my dad was an alcoholic when I was younger, you know, and I saw how it affected his relationship with my mom. You know, I remember he used to pick me up from Christian school in like 4th or 5th grade, and he would drive me straight from school to the bar, and I would sit there and drink Shirley Temples while he got wasted and then drove me home. So I didn't want to be like that at all, and you know, plus my mom was dead set against drinking, and the last thing in the world I wanted to do was disappoint her. So, you know, I stayed away from it completely. You know, and then when I found that there was a subculture of punk rock that was kids who agreed with my stance on the abstinence of drugs and alcohol, I was immediately just in. A subculture of a subculture. Like, how fucking elite is that? Plus, straight edge had this weird affinity for Star Wars, which I clearly think is pretty fucking cool. Through straight edge, I found a lot of my social and political views, you know, my views on prejudice, homophobia, sexism, veganism. You know, back when I was straight edge, it was more than just not doing drugs. Straight edge was also about learning and bettering yourself. You know, we had bands like Chokehold and Asssuck and Catharsis, and Versatile Man and Frail, Refused, Unbroken. You know, bands who actually said something with their music. You know, this is also the time of zines. If you don't know what zines are, please go Google them. New ideas were being spread all over the place. Anti-racist protests were happening. Animal rights protests were happening. Gay rights protests were happening. This was the time of sharing ideas with other people and really discovering how the world worked. And straight edge and hardcore was really about like learning how people behaved in places outside of your own tight little bubble, man. It was all about learning. Why did I sell out? I sold out honestly because I just didn't care about straight edge anymore. That was the main reason. I think it was also because, I was past the time of learning. I'd come into my own. My politics and opinions on the world were pretty much already set. Plus at that point, there seemed to be a shift in the priorities of a lot of hardcore bands. Well, a lot of the bands that I came up listening to, they'd already broken up, but the others just kind of stopped really being about anything. They didn't talk politics, they didn't talk activism, they didn't talk about issues. They didn't really talk about much of anything. Like, hardcore kind of dissolved quite a bit, man. Like bands just started doing like these huge tours. The small shows and house shows that I come up going to were just kind of sparse. The whole metalcore thing broke out. I just became really disinterested in the scene. And rather being that bitter old man that's at hardcore shows whining about this isn't hardcore, I just chose to just not go anymore, man. Like, when hardcore bands that I liked came to town, yeah, I'd get up off my ass and go support, but when it came to newer bands, I just didn't bother. Then the straight edge kids really took a turn for the worse. I quit around the time that things started getting really violent. We had the FSU crew, we had the Courage crew. Straight edge had nothing to do with learning new things or bettering yourself anymore. It was just about, we don't do drugs. So we could be as douchey as the next person as long as we didn't do drugs, man. Straight edge kids could be sexist, straight edge kids could be homophobic, straight edge kids could be, like, jokingly racist. And it was totally cool as long as you didn't do drugs. You were automatically a part of the crew. And, I'm not speaking about every straight edge kid in the world. I'm not trying to generalize the whole group due to a couple bad apples. But, I know a lot of great straight edge kids. Some of my best friends are straight edge. That totally sounds like a I'm not racist comeback, but it's actually true. Literally, some of my best friends are still straight edge. I'm just talking about things I started to notice within the scene here and the places that I visited on a semi-regular basis. It was like, what's the point of being sober if you're not doing anything with having a clear mind except going to shows, listening to bands, dancing, and then talking about other bands? But like I said, the majority of the reason I sold out was because I just didn't give a shit about straight edge anymore. It wasn't for me anymore. However, I still think straight edge is great. I get stoked when I hear about new straight edge bands now. When I'm out and I see someone in a straight edge hoodie, it feels cool. I don't know too much about too many new straight edge bands, with the exception of Foundation, of course, because they're from Atlanta and they're a really good band. But if I get sent a link to a new straight edge band, I'll definitely stop and go check them out. And if they're about something other than we're just straight edge, then I'll become a new fan. Straight edge got me through some really rough times, man, and it kept me out of trouble throughout my youth. But when I was about 25, it had run its course for me personally. I was old enough to where I could handle alcohol responsibly. I could make logical choices of whether or not I wanted to try drugs. I got past the idea of thinking that taking one drink would immediately turn me into an alcoholic like my father. So one fine New Year's Eve, I bet some friends that I would have myself a Bartles and James. And I won that bet. How many people do you know that can say they sold out on a 4-pack of Bartles and James? So I drank that whole 4-pack of fruit punch flavored Bartles and James, and then proceeded to drink anything else that was put in front of me, which led to a really, really weird night. That night included making out with a girl whose breast smelled like she'd been eating some kind of soup made from the funk in between a homeless man's toes, or like she brushed her teeth with baby shit. But that's another story. Anyway, shout out to all my straight edge friends. Keep it up. You guys are awesome. As long as you're keeping it positive, you fucking rule in my book, man. Third and last question. G-Funk Dinosaur said, how do you stop holding grudges? I don't. Once you piss me off, you're pretty much dead to me. So that's it for this edition of What Do You Want to Know? As usual, thank you for living, thank you for loving, thank you for being you. And I'll see you guys next time. Alright?